Hi guys, if you're watching this video, you're probably interested in replacing your water pump impeller on your Mercruiser stern drive. I'm going to do that on this Alpha 1 Gen 2. You can tell it's a Gen 2 by the stainless steel housing. The Gen 1 and maybe even I think what they call the R has a plastic housing. Different procedure for that. It's a pretty simple operation. There's a couple of things that you need to be aware of, which we'll go over along the way. One thing that I did is once you take it off of the upper drive housing, which is a pretty simple thing, there's two bolts on each side, and then there's a bolt in the front and the back, and you have to take off the anodes to be able to get to some of those, but it's a pretty basic thing. It's not hard to figure out. May have to pry it loose a little bit depending on how old or how long it's been on there. It may be corroded and sealed together, but as usual, you don't want to use any heavy metal tools trying to break them apart, or you'll bend them, which can cause other problems. But once you get it off, take the time to put it somewhere where you can work on it. Don't try to set it up on concrete blocks and work on it in your driveway. You'll just end up scratching it up, and then you'll want to repaint that if you scratch it too much. Plus, it's an awkward thing the way it's shaped. It won't stand up by itself. So go ahead and take the time to either try to mount it to your bench if you have some kind of a mount to do that. I didn't, so I made this wooden frame here. It only took about 30 minutes to do it. I just had some scrap wood, so I put it together. It sits down into it, so I know that it's not going to fall over on me. It's stable, and I can transport it back and forth to the boat in my car. So what I'm going to show you is I've already actually taken the pump off, and I'm just going to kind of go back through that procedure so that you can see what I did. But before you really do anything, go ahead and invest in a good mechanics manual like this one from C-Lock. I highly recommend this one. It's very detailed and accurate with its information. Also, make sure you have marine grease. This is 2,4-C, which is recommended actually by this manual. I've also got some gasket sealer that I'm going to use. And then some touch-up paint. This is oil-based paint. And then, of course, the replacement part for the impeller and the water pump housing itself is all in here. So I got the gaskets, I've got the plate, I've got the housing, and all the pieces that come with that. Once you have all of that, then you're ready to go ahead and take the old pump off. So when you take this apart, it's pretty basic. First thing you do is you take this off. This is the water feed tube that goes up into your drive housing and on its way to the engine. It has two pieces to it. This is nothing more than a guide tube so that when you put it back together, the main tube that fits into this mates inside this coupling, and it has two O-rings in it, which we are going to replace those, but just set that aside for now, clean it up. And then the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to slide off this rubber, I believe it's called a sling seal, but it's effectively pushed down over the drive shaft onto the top of the housing. And its purpose is not to keep water from getting into the unit. It's sort of the other way around, because water is already inside the unit. It's a water pump after all, and so it just needs to slide down where it just barely touches against the housing to keep water from slinging out and up into your drive housing and other components. But anyway, you slide it up, you take that off, and then there's just 4 bolts like this that hold the whole thing down. And once you have those off, you can work off the housing. You may have to use something like this to pry it off. Again, you want to be careful and not damage anything. When you take it off, importantly, notice which direction your impeller is rotating. That's the impeller inside there. It's a rubber impeller, and you can actually twist it. It turns, it's supposed to turn. But make sure you note the direction of which the blades are rotating. This is a this unit rotates clockwise this way. So when it's on, it's going to rotate the impeller clockwise, which means if you're looking at it upside down, it's actually counterclockwise. So notice those are counterclockwise. But in any case, if you're not sure, just make note of it. And my recommendation with any of this stuff is take your phone out and take a picture of your parts if you're not sure, and that way, if you have to refer to them later, you have them copied where you can see them. So anyway, you set this aside, and next thing is, there's a plate here that you have to take off, and I actually have this one upside down. It really should have gone this way. I've already disassembled this before. I'm just walking you through what I did. But this plate has a gasket on the bottom and a gasket on the top. And this one, you can see, has a little bit of wear to it. I can run my fingernail across it and feel the wear. It's not significant, but, probably good to replace it. Once you take this off, you'll want to clean this area really good around here. Mine was pretty clean, but a lot of the paint had chipped off, and the aluminum, the metal, was exposed in a couple of other places, especially in the front here. So I cleaned that up, and again, I used oil-based paint and painted it just to make sure that all the metal surfaces were covered so that they wouldn't corrode. And something that's really important to point out is, and you're going to see this in other videos, it's going to be mentioned anywhere you go, anywhere near instructions for how to do this, but this little hole here is that's the gear lube transfer hole, so that the gear lube that's coming from the upper drive housing, this is how it makes it down into your gear assembly in the bottom through this little hole. So there's a rubber O-ring there that you have to make sure that you take out and you replace it, which it comes in your kit, so you'll have one, but don't forget to replace it. But I even go a step further and I plug it up with something as I'm working on this, because if you're going to scrape things like this, you're going to get debris and stuff down in that hole, and that's going to go right down into your gear assembly in the bottom. So why do that? So I would recommend plugging that up, getting all of this nice and clean, and then once you do that, then you're ready to put the new unit back on. The other thing to make sure that you check out is run your fingernail up and down the shaft to make sure you don't feel any grooves. If you feel grooves, it means that something hasn't been wearing properly. This unit's only 2 years old, and so it was installed by the factory the last time the impeller was put together, so there's no problems with this shaft. But still, check it out anyway, just to make sure that there's not any problems with that. You'll also want to take out the key on the drive shaft. This is what holds the impeller in place. Your new kit should have a new replacement for that. So let's look at what we have in the new kit. Most of them are pretty much the same. This one has everything in it. I've got a new base plate. I've got 2 gaskets, the upper and lower. Got all the rubber O-rings, and there's a little tool in here, a plastic tool, that's used to seat the sling gasket on the top of the shaft. You cannot leave that on there. It's just a tool that you press down and take off. We'll see that in a second. Obviously, our rubber impeller, notice that the blades are not curved because it's new and straight. And then last thing is we have the housing itself, stainless steel housing. This is the new one. Your old one may be fine, so you can actually, this is the old one that I have. You can take it out. I'm going to take the impeller out of it. It'll hold that shape for a couple of days. It'll eventually stretch itself out where it's almost straight. But you can feel the inside of it. Run your fingernail and see if you feel any grooves and things like that in there. If you don't necessarily need to replace the housing. It's perfectly fine. Even in some cases, you can inspect your rubber impeller, and if it looks like it's in good shape and it's only been a year or two, you can probably even reuse it. But while you're in here and you've already done all of this work and you have all your parts, you might as well just replace it with new stuff. They're not that expensive, and it's worth the investment. So something that's important that it's actually recommended in the mechanics manuals. You'll see it on other videos too. I thought it was a great idea, and so I'm going to use this as well. But trying to line up all of the gaskets, there's only one way that they line up, so you're not going to get it wrong. But they do have a little bit of wiggle room, and that wiggle room is really important because you really don't want the housing to be touching the shaft, and you want to get everything lined up. And so Mercruiser sells these little guide pins that fit these screw holes, and I don't know how much they cost, but I didn't have them, and I just went down to the hardware store and I got the exact thread size, and these were bolts, so I just took a hacksaw and I cut off the top of the bolts, and so now I have these guide pins. And what's important about these is if you look on your plate, you'll notice that the holes are not all the same size. I don't know if you can see that, but two of the holes are smaller, they're adjacent, and two are bigger. And so I actually put these in the small holes so that when I put this down over it, you know, it has less room to play on it. But anyway, go ahead and create these. They're useful, especially if you're going to do this every couple of years. This kind of stuff, you're just building your inventory of supplies so that you can reuse it every time that you do this. Okay, so now I'm ready to put it back together. I got my guides in there, and I'm gonna put this first gasket on. Goes on first, and like I said, it only goes on one way. So if it goes on the other way, you'll know. I'm not going to put any sealant on the bottom side, but I am going to put some on the top side. And I'm just going to really put it around the outside here. I'm not going to put very much, just a little bit. The mechanics manual doesn't mention anything about putting gasket sealer on it, but when I took the old one off, I noticed that it had it on it, so I'm just going to do the same thing there. Like that. Again, it doesn't have to be very much. And then I'm going to put the plate on next. But before I do that, I got a little bit of the sealer on the shaft. And make sure I clean that off. I got this on the right way. Is that the right way? Nope, it's not. Like I said, you'll know immediately if it's not. Push that down like that. Okay, and then now I'm ready to put the the next one on. And I'm going to put a little bit of sealer on the top side of this as well. So I'm just going to trace this around here. Seen other videos and they don't use any sealer at all. Probably okay. Like I said, when I took the old one off from the manufacturer, the gaskets were stuck to the plate. So figure it can't hurt. Okay, done with that. And now I take my top gasket, and you want to, it'll go on there one way. I know I've said that 1,000 times, but you'll know because this one has a little rubber ring on the top that's going to mate with the bottom of the drive housing. So I'm just going to press on that. Okay, now next thing is we need the key. So in the parts for your new kit, you should have a new key. And to make that key stick, I'm going to put a little bit of the marine grease on it, just a dab, doesn't take much. On the back side of it, I'm going to rotate this shaft where it's facing me, where I can see it, just like that. I'm going to turn it around where you can see it. Okay, now comes the interesting part. There's two ways to put the impeller inside the housing. This is the old one. One way is you can twist it in yourself. You have to make sure that you're putting it in the right direction like we talked about. So in either case, you want to put some grease on the inside so that it twists in, because it is a tight fit and it's not an easy thing. It doesn't just slide in. But I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to do it the way the mechanic's manual says to do it, and the way I've read and heard from some other mechanics that have done this is I'm going to put it on first. I'm going to put the impeller on first, and then I'm going to work the housing down over the impeller while twisting the shaft. And to do that, I'm going to use this so that I have a good tight grip on the shaft. You can do it by hand, but these things are kind of sharp and they'll cut into your palm if you do it that way. So I'm going to take my my new impeller, and I'm going to bring it down over the key. You'll know it's only going to go one way. Bring it down over the key, and then I'm going to take my new housing, which I have here, and I'm going to put some grease on the inside, smooth it out like this. I'm going to put a little on the top too. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to put just a little bit of grease on the leading edges of this. Now remember, for my unit, it turns this way. It turns clockwise, right? So what I'm going to do is when I'm pressing the housing down over this, I'm going to be forcing the impeller up into the housing. So that way, even if I forget which way these go, they will set themselves, and that's what they call it. The impeller is going to set itself in the right direction. Okay. Now I have my housing. I'm going to set it down on top of the shaft this way. Okay. And then just for some leverage, I'm going to wrap this rag around the top where I can get a good grip on this, like this. And I'm hoping you can see this, but I'm going to press down on the housing as I rotate this. Like that. Okay. And now they're in there going the right direction. And what I'm also going to do, just so that you can see it, but it's also to check it. So now if you look, they're going the right direction. Right, so that's how you do that. So now that I have it on there, I'm ready to put the other screws in that hold it down. So I'm going to leave the guide pins in while I do this, and I'm going to put these guys in. And something very important about it when you do this, like I said before, there's a little bit of play in these holes where you shouldn't just tighten it down just because you have the screws in the right place. And the reason is this housing should not touch the shaft. If it's pushed over to one side, the housing can rub against the shaft, and that's going to cut a groove in the shaft, which obviously is no good. So once you get it on here, and you get it sort of snug, like I'm about to do, you'll want to kind of move it around so that you can visually look down and make sure that there's no way that shaft is going to touch the edges of that housing. So I'm just going to snug these down like this, right? And then I'm going to look at it, and looks like it's pretty much perfect right there. And then I'm going to snug these down. And when you do this, just do opposite edges first. Don't do one too tight at a time. Get them all snug, and then you can snug them down where they're tight. They don't have to be real tight, but you do want them snugged. If you're not sure and you have a torque wrench, check your manual and do the right thing and torque them. So the last thing that we have to do is we have to put this sling seal on it. And this is pretty easy to do. I'm just going to put a little bit of grease on the bottom of this seal, and I'm going to press it on here with my fingers at first, but then I'm going to use this tool that comes with it. All this is a tool, and the purpose of it is two things. It makes sure that it pushes everything down nice and level and square so that it mates with the top of the housing perfectly flat, but it's also the thickness of it is perfect so that when you do this, all you have to do is push it straight down, and when it stops, it's at its perfect height. And then the most important part is you take this off. Do not leave this on. It's not really part of the seal, it's just a tool. If you don't have that tool, some kits don't have the tool, then the rule is that you need some sort of a flat type of a washer or a pipe or something that's just slightly bigger than the shaft, and you slide it down, and then as you're pulling up on the shaft, you want to push down the seal to where it just barely touches the top of the housing, and if you do that, it'll be in its perfect spot. But that's called seating the seal, and you want to do it just like that. You don't want to push it down with your fingers, and you don't want it to be too high. It should be just like that. So now the last thing that we have to do to complete this is remember our water tube that feeds into the upper drive housing has two O-rings in it. Those two O-rings are in my kit, and you just take these out and you replace them with the new ones. And as we mentioned before, when you put this back together onto your upper drive housing, Got the little O-ring that's in here that came with the kit. I'm not going to put it on right now. Don't forget the O-ring. It's very, very important. And I actually have an extra gasket that came in this kit, and I don't know what it's for. So if somebody wants to post a comment to this video and tell me what you think it's for, I would appreciate it. I didn't find anywhere where this went. It may go in the back, or maybe it goes up here in the front, but I can't really think of a place where that needs to go. So anyway, that's how you replace a water pump impeller on a Alpha 1 Gen 2 stern drive. Hope this helped.